So, Stefan, you've been quite instrumental in building up, or actually, yeah, you are the person who built out the RevOps function at Sastrify, and you've been in the RevOps sphere for quite some time now. So, I'd be really keen, like, with a little bit of a kind of a backstory first. Like, what kind of sparked your interest in revenue operations? Like, why did you get into that field in the first place?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So first of all, a bit of background to that. So initially, I started in revenue operations, I think beginning of 2021, after I founded my own company, which we then decided to sunset. And afterwards, it was pretty clear for me that I wanted to go back to what I was originally doing, which was sales. But I also wanted to develop into a direction of working more on the strategic aspects. So to combine a little bit what I did as a founder, right, where you're thinking a lot more strategically and about processes and strategy and KPIs and so on and so forth, and to combine that with sales initially. So back then, I got in touch with a startup here from Hamburg called Opinio, and that brought me to revenue operations because from the conversations that I had with the COO back then, who's now the CEO at Opinio, it became quite clear that this combination of KPI strategy and processes with sales ultimately leads to sales ops slash RevOps function, and that's how I kicked off in this field. That's the one part, and then I transitioned over to Sastrify, where I was actually one of the first employees to start. I was the very first sales hire. So initially, I also did sales together with the founder. When I joined, the company had about 10 employees, and ultimately I made a deal with Sven, the CEO and founder, that after we started to slowly scale the organization and hire more salespeople, hire customer success, hire more marketing staff, that I will transition into a RevOps function where it's more about building the backbone. I think that's especially in the initial phase something that you're obviously doing, right? Because if you start that early in a company, nothing is there. They don't have a CRM that's really working well. You don't have any tools, any foundation layer from a data model perspective. So initially you start everything from scratch, and that's what I then had to do after finding that agreement with our CEO. And yes, ever since I've been in this function now, and we scaled the company to over 120 employees that we are at the moment. Raised a Series B, extended that one in November last year again. So I went through this entire growth journey over the past 3 years nearly with Sastrify now, and that's a little bit of background about my role and how I got into revenue operations.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think the kind of having a background in sales, if you're actually doing system setup and things like that, I think that's so important because you get both sides of the story. You actually have done it yourself, so you kind of understand the challenges. So I think like that kind of combination, I think that's really, really powerful in this kind of role. So do you agree or disagree with that?
Fully agree, even though I would say I would extend it a little bit by saying that, in my opinion, it also depends on your set up business model and your go-to-market function. So imagine you are running more of a PLG, product-led growth function, then maybe it's even better to have a stronger marketing background, right? So because the marketing operations piece about optimizing the very first conversion, optimizing product signups, the nurturing of leads that are signing up to a free platform, for example, all of that ultimately becomes a marketing topic. And I think in that sense, if you have a better understanding of demand generation, LinkedIn, the entire LinkedIn game, Google, even paid, but even more so SEO, I think in that scenario, marketing operations background initially probably makes more sense. If you're more dependent on potentially growth from an existing customer perspective, then maybe a customer success operations or customer success background is even more helpful than a sales background, because you have a better understanding of how to prevent churn, how to grow organizations together with the startup that you're working at. So ultimately, I think it depends a little bit. In our scenario, where Sastrify was a lot and is still a lot about a two-sided sales motion, SDRs and AEs. I think my setup and having a background in sales and having sold Sastrify definitely helped me to also, initially I was next to our founder, obviously someone who enabled the team as well, doing a bit of sales enablement, onboarding everyone on new processes that I've built. Obviously, that becomes a lot easier if you sold the solution yourself, if you have been in the shoes of an AE or an SDR before. So then you can also always think about the solution and processes that you're building, the systems, as you call it, right? A little bit more from their perspective, and I think it will make process adoption a lot easier than over-engineering things right from the start. I think that's something that especially RevOps folks sometimes tend to lean towards, right? This piece of over-engineering, making sure that nobody can interpret the process in the wrong way or escape the process, right? As process adherence is so important in revenue operations to generate the data that we all want to look at. And ultimately, that often leads to a little bit of over-engineering. And I think if you've been in a productive role before, customer-facing role before, I think you might look at things a little bit differently compared to someone who has only worked in a Salesforce admin role before, for example.
It's the classic, like wanting to save 30 seconds and spending 4 days building out this very elaborate automation so probably good to have a little bit of that because I think you learn a lot from doing it. But yeah, that kind of, especially like when you're growing as quickly as you guys have been doing, like not focusing too much on over-engineering system is probably quite essential. But I do agree, like, I really agree with your point there, like, and that's why it's so important as well. Like know what is your go-to-market strategy, like how are you going to get new customers, and not just, as a lot of companies do, pick whatever CRM without really thinking about what is our go-to-market and what is our need. So they just do something, but having that kind of a thought, like what is our go-to-market strategy? What kind of skills do we actually need for the kind of motion that we have? I do believe that a lot of companies kind of skip over that part a little bit. And I did now as well, because I just blanket said that sales is great. But of course, as you said as well, customer success, marketing, depending on the current needs, are also like very, very good skills, like a practitioner skills.
Fully agree. I think overall, that's also something that, like, if you asked me what would be like a good profile to hire in an initial startup phase, right? I think a generalist often makes sense. So I think overall, I've seen two things happening in startups. So either you have someone who moves, like I did, from a more operational role into a RevOps function, such as an account executive who's more technical, is more process and data oriented, or someone from marketing or customer success, as we just discussed. The other piece is that I've seen startups as well where a chief of staff or founder associate, who are normally profiles coming from business schools, worked in consulting before, have a really good understanding of data, but are also more of a generalist. They tend to develop quite nicely into a RevOps role as well. And for example, at a good friend of mine, Jonathan, working at Leapsum, he did exactly that thing, right? So he started as a founding associate or chief of staff, and then transitioned into a kind of RevOps function and built that from scratch.
Yeah, a lot of ways to start, as long as you're curious, I guess, as with a lot of roles. Awesome. Let's go back a little bit there to the kind of because I think a really like a central piece of what we want to talk about today is how it is that kind of fast growth, 3 years from a very small team to 130 people and starting from scratch, as you also mentioned there. Like, what was some of the kind of initial challenges that you faced there when you started to set up this RevOps function and scaling it up? And how did you approach that in the first place?
Yeah, so the very first project that I kicked off was the transition from Pipedrive to HubSpot. The pure reason for that was, I think Pipedrive is a quite nice tool to initially start out with, right? But what it lacks is to bring marketing, sales, and potentially customer success together, right? So I think the moment that we start to look into how can we optimize our LinkedIn game, how can we start optimizing our marketing operations, this entire shift towards HubSpot as a CRM made quite a lot of sense. So that was one of the first projects that I initiated. And ultimately, I think one of the challenges that you're facing is in this fast growth is simply that you can never really find a time in which you start optimizing processes, right? So to give you a little bit of background, until the end of last year or mid of last year, we never really started optimizing processes. It was just a never-ending story of adding another tool or building out another process, or especially in this fast growth environment, you constantly have new joiners. And what happens quite naturally, on the one hand, everyone comes in with their own vocabulary. So you spend quite a lot of time discussing, what do we mean when we talk about SQLs? Is it a booked meeting? Is it a qualified lead for sales? Was it qualified by sales? What is a qualified opportunity? Stuff like that takes quite a lot of time. And what I experienced personally is that we had a very experienced VP of marketing joining, then we had a very experienced VP of sales joining, and all of them, they come with their own vocabulary, their own perspective on things. And I think in my position back then, it took quite a lot of effort to moderate these situations, right? And I had a strong opinion, the VP of marketing had a strong opinion, our VP of sales had a strong opinion, our CEO still does until today have a very strong opinion on a lot of topics. So ultimately bringing all of them together and finding out, okay, what works for us and what works for the setup and the stage that we are in, right? I think that's one of the most challenging things that I've seen, and where you can get a lot of things wrong initially because you just talk about different things. And I think along the way of scaling, right, that's something that occurs then very regularly, where new people join and you just need to explain things again. And the beauty at the same time is that these people come with a lot of background and a lot of knowledge into the organization. And they also challenge, of course, the status quo, which is super helpful, right? So you also start to think again, like, does this setup currently make a lot of sense? Yes, no. Do we need to adjust the process so that it's scalable for the next stage, the next phase that we're entering? So a lot of that reflection happens on the way, but it's super, super difficult while you're growing, right? Because we had times where we had 15 new joiners within a month or two, not all within customer-facing organizations, but also product is asking questions like, okay, where are we losing certain deals and so on and so forth. So the projects are just piling up, and definitely prioritization is one of the harder things to master if you're working in such a fast-growing organization.
Yeah, I think it's still surprising to me, like so many times where you ask about those definitions in even like kind of mature companies, and if you ask sales and marketing, it means something different. Because no one has actually had that discussion, like what exactly are we talking about here? And yeah, MQLs and SQLs, that's definitely one of the hot potatoes a lot of the time. I'm usually there as well. As long as everyone internally agrees on something, then we have a pretty good foundation. As long as we're just talking about the right thing. But it's quite an interesting thing that was one of the main initial things. But I can definitely see that is where, if the communication falls down between departments, you do have a bit of a problem. And also what you talked about initially with the KPIs and metrics that kind of first, like, also attracted you a bit to RevOps. Like, if you don't know what you're talking about, it's very hard to set clear goals for people, because you talk about different things. Um, you mentioned prioritization though, because that is, would imagine, like, I can't even like fathom how to kind of, because you're still one person RevOps team, right?
Uh, by now, I have one additional person in my
You have
team.
one more. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that person started last year in August. So, and
Okay,
along
last.
the
Okay,
way,
gotcha.
there
Yeah.
were people who, like, I had interns or working students who joined for a couple of months, but most of the time I was just by myself. And to touch the topic of prioritization again, I think one thing is that helps to prioritize is definitely stakeholder management. And with that, I simply mean that, okay, I can focus on what the VP of sales wants or what the VP of marketing want, but if they tell me they both topics have the same level of prioritization for them, and the VP of marketing wants me to focus on lead routing and optimizing that process, and the VP of sales wants me to focus on forecasting, then these two need to get together and decide, okay, what is it that Stefan should be focusing on right now, right? Is it topic A or is it topic B? Because ultimately, you only have, what, 10 hours a day to work, especially in these fast growing organizations. So you need to start prioritizing these topics, and it's becoming a lot easier if you kind of outsource that decision a little bit to the people who are asking you to do stuff. So that's one of the tactics that I followed along the way, and I'm still following today, right? So different people come to me with different requirements and different asks. Then I'm saying, okay, but if you want me to focus on that topic right now, I need to drop the ball on something else, because I can't just do everything at once. It just doesn't work, and then I'm also not delivering the quality of work that I would love to deliver. And as a consequence, I think these internal discussions definitely help to prioritize where you're going to focus on next.
Yeah. So you gotta be willing and not be afraid to say no, and at least challenge opinions, right? Because as you said there, if you're focusing on too many different things, and also then you actually don't know if the change you made worked or not, because you're just changing everything at the same time and you're doing what everyone wants at the same time. And I think that's how you end up with a gazillion tools and a lot of half finished things, because you're just saying yes to everything. So I think like that kind of saying no, or just challenging and not just disagreeing with everything, I think that's so important, especially when you have that bridge role that you do have in RevOps between different teams.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I personally experienced as well, and funny enough, we coming back to the topic of vocabulary slash people coming in from different backgrounds, because ultimately what happens as well is that if you're scaling an organization that quickly, right, you're getting people from the outside to join the startup who normally went through that scaling phase again, right? But the last thing that they were working on was a startup that maybe had a RevOps team of 3 or 4 or 5 people, right? So that could simply handle way more things than I can handle, right? So naturally, what I started to do is also playing a little bit of the devil's advocate and an internal consultant, if you want, to people like our VP of sales to say like, hey, is this process or this tool that you're suggesting, is that actually what we need at this point in time? Or is it just over engineering things, right? Can we just solve that with a tool that we already have, with a little bit of yeah, okay, it's not perfect, but it gets the job done 80% of the time. So let's do that until we are really at a stage where we need, I don't know, one topic that I'm still solving via spreadsheets is sales compensation, right? So that's a process that is now automated. For me, 80% of the job is automated via copy pasting data from HubSpot into to a spreadsheet, and the formulas are doing the calculation of everything. But ultimately, of course, you could buy a tool like Everstage or like Captivate IQ or Dolphin or whatever else, right? Um, but the question is like, do you need that at that point in time? So I think that is for me a good example where you can work with a simpler solution for the stage that you're in until you reach a point where, because you need a lot of approval work, you want to create more transparency for reps and whatnot, you really tap into the solution of buying a sales compensation platform. So I think that are things that also naturally happen, is that people come to you with a lot of expectations and a lot of ideas because they come from large organizations that went through that scaling process already, and they bring those ideas to you, and then it's about, as you said, right, saying no, hey, this is too early for the stage that we are in, challenging that a little bit until you get to a point where it's really relevant. And yeah, I think that's something that you, as a RevOps folk in such a early stage startup, should definitely be doing.
So looking at that journey, and we like going back a bit here. So we spoke about, one of the first things you did was to move over from Pipedrive to HubSpot, get more stuff into the same place. Like looking at the journey that you made, like what would you say, like if you kind of pinpoint some of the kind of key steps or key points in your journey, like as you're scaling up the RevOps function, like could you like walk me through like some of those stages that you saw, if there were any clear stages, or maybe it was more of so kind of fluent and ongoing, so there isn't any kind of clear steps involved in it?
I think that's a tough question, or at the same time an
Can't make it
interesting
too
one,
easy.
because there's obviously no blueprint, right? And I need to say it, as we talked about different go-to-market motions. It will always depend on your go-to-market motion, right? So what I'm just saying worked for me at Sastrify, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work in any different startup. So I think one of the first things that you need to think about is how you get yourself to a stage where you have some sort of reportable data. What does that mean? It simply means that you have a good understanding of your sales process, for example, and that you have very defined stages. Obviously, within the 3 years that I've been at Sastrify, I think we have revisited our sales process and stages at least 3 or 4 times. So that's something that comes with the development of the company. It happens again and again. But I think defining that initial set of, okay, this is how we want to run the sales process, and having defined those different stages, that is for me the first level of optimizing things, right? And I think as a founder, you're also interested in understanding a little bit better some of the key components. So some of the things that I would be looking at is, if you are in this seed phase, where you're trying to figure out, okay, who are the right buying personas, who are the right industries that I'm selling into, where do I see early success signals, so that I basically figure out how can I track that in whatever system I chose, right? No matter if that's HubSpot or Pipedrive or Salesforce or whatever else CRM that is out there. But ultimately, I think you want to have that initial understanding. Where do I see success signals? Because if you then raise a Series A, if you raise a Series B, you want to take that money and scale that one go-to-market motion. I think one of the things that I see happening quite often in startups, and I do a little bit of consulting work on the side, or at least I talk to different startups, is that too early they tell me like, yeah, we are seeing success here right now. Why don't we add a PLG motion, or why don't we move up market into the enterprise function? So, yeah, but you don't even know if this function that you're currently running, this mid-market function, if that is really scaling well for you. Why are you not taking more money and invest into that function before adding other things? Because if you want to move into a PLG motion, like, you need to change so many processes. You need to change the entire mindset of your organization. And ultimately, I think that's where I think this entire topic of getting your initial sales process and right, and getting the understanding of, hey, is the go-to-market function that we selected, is that actually scalable for a Series A, a Series B, and can we really optimize that not only within one market but potentially internationalization as well, right? So if you move from Germany, obviously, like, the Nordics is one of the markets that's often picked as number one or two or three, right, next to the Benelux, France, and UKI. So ultimately, if you want to scale that same playbook that you used in international markets, I think having that initial understanding is super, super crucial. So I think setting the foundation of sales process and a couple of KPIs, such as industries, understanding, okay, what is my sales cycle length, depending on maybe a bit of company size, buying persona, and so on and so forth. If that differs for you, I think getting that initial understanding, how that differs along those lines, is super, super helpful. And I think that's definitely stage one that you need to nail before you do anything else. It's just the foundation of growth.
Dan, I like what you said there with like there is no blueprint. That kind of question for me, like, because there's so many companies when they start with a new, say that they want to start using HubSpot, as you said, like whatever CRM you're picking or whatever kind of tool, it always starts with like, what are the best practices? Like, what should we be doing like that everyone else is doing? And how can we build a structure that is going to last forever so we never have to revisit it again? And to me, that's not really a way to approach it. Like, more like the way you're and I'm putting words in your mouth here, so you can correct me if you don't fully agree. But like, actually starting with that, like, what are we doing? How are we doing it? And doing some decent discovery. Like, if you are from a sales background, putting in some of that kind of discovery skills and understanding what the different stakeholders actually want, and daring to focus on, I think there's a German saying, like, is it like weniger aber besser or something like that, less but better. I think that's a German saying. And I really believe in that mindset, what you said there. Focus on getting a few things right first. HubSpot scaled pretty well in the SMB market until they went into enterprise for like 10 years. Did I get this pronunciation right, by the way? Or was that completely off? Okay, yeah, okay, maybe. It was a long time ago since I read that saying. Um, but yeah, okay, so focusing on fewer things, getting it right for making sure you have that kind of product market fit and can scale that up before you add new stuff. That would be one of the key things that you would say to really get right first.
Yes, and I think then in a second stage you can definitely think about, okay, what are the bits of the revenue funnel do we need to optimize in order to further scale this go-to-market function, right? And by nature, we are talking then about an additional tool. For example, one of the initial things that happens naturally is if you have a SDR team, you're thinking about a tool like SalesLoft, Outreach, Apollo, you name it. There's so many different tools out there that in the end all do a very similar job. in theory, you can do the same thing with HubSpot as well, right? But if you want to go one level deeper, having an additional layer of analytics, then maybe a tool like Salesloft or Outreach can be added in order to really help your SDR function to better understand, okay, what are my next tasks? What are the priorities that I need to set for today, and really get that SDR machinery running? I think that's one thing, right? By nature, you should be starting to think about, okay, what is the best tool to use for customer success, right? Do you need a dedicated tool? But that also depends again a little bit on your go-to-market motion, right? So if you have a very simple customer success function where it's more about customer support, tools like Freshdesk, HubSpot, Intercom, they get you a long way. And that's then totally fine. If you want to move more into the strategic side of customer success, maybe adding a plan hat or a gain site might be the next step, right? And I think that way you get a good understanding of where you can then, after you've set that groundwork a little bit, and if you then move back to this revenue funnel, right, where it's about top of the funnel, then you have in the middle the sales process and closing the business, and then you are thinking about, okay, how can I retain the customers that I have, but also upsell and grow them? Then you can also see like, okay, what are maybe tools that I need to add to my core infrastructure? And I think that's kind of a second stage that you naturally tap into. But again, depending on your go-to-market motion, depending on your focus, you might end up picking different tools, or different tools might become more relevant, right? I think if you're running a PLG motion, you might be talking more about a mix panel in combination with segments, so to understand product signals way better, right? So that sort of stuff becomes in a PLG motion way more relevant. So depending on, again, what your go-to-market motion is, you will end up picking different tools, and that can keep you quite busy, especially if you're scaling as well, to make sure that they all communicate well, that you can track your revenue funnel from start to finish. So that's definitely another piece that you might tap into. Quite interesting from my perspective is that at the moment I feel like, and happy to get your perspective on that as well, is that you see a bit of a trend, at least in the revenue operations or go-to-market tool landscape, of tool consolidation, right? We, for example, at Sastrify for a very long time followed the best of breed approach, where it was about, hey, we want to have a sales loft in place to optimize our go-to-market motion for the SDRs. But now we are thinking way more, okay, is that actually necessary at the moment? At the same time, you see a lot of acquisitions happening, right? Or tools deciding to develop certain things on top. You see a sales loft tapping into the area of Gong tapping into sales loft. You have Clary that is moving into all sorts of directions at a time, right? So ultimately, you're also facing now a world where consolidation is happening again, also driven by the macro environment, right? Reducing costs is definitely something that a lot of companies are facing. So tool consolidation is a quite natural step for many startups out there. And so ultimately, I think now probably if I was put into this position and the same spot as I used to at Sastrify, building something from scratch, would probably build way more stuff directly in HubSpot before buying additional tools, just because it's way more cost efficient. But that's just my perspective, and also what we from what we do at Sastrify, right? Sastrify in the end is a SaaS procurement tool, so we understand quite well from the data of our customers what tools get bought and dropped and consolidated, in the end, we see that companies are moving into that direction of tool consolidation, and only the ones that have a really stable business model at the moment are not thinking about tool consolidations, but even those are moving maybe more towards one tool and centralizing things instead of having them live in separate systems.
Yeah, I mean, it's I would say like overall, like yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that there is a lot of that going on, and I think there's so many reasons to it. Like one is like you touched on it a bit there with HubSpot. If you would do it again, you would probably do way more in HubSpot. But of course, there's so many things happening in HubSpot the last like 3 years, so you can also do a lot more now. And you have, the custom objects. You have a lot more customization, also because HubSpot is going up market. So of course, that is going to allow you to do more stuff in HubSpot as well. And I know as well, like when I was like first I was an SDR and then, as a sales rep and stuff like that, like you had your own tools and every rep had their own stuff they're using. Then you have the real CRM, then you have some spreadsheets, and there's also a lot of tools that the company is paying for that you're not even sure if people are using it or not. So this is creating kind of one big mess, I think, for a lot of companies. So wanting to actually get more stuff into one place, I mean, it will reduce friction and it will increase your data quality. And I think you mentioned it a bit earlier as well, like having kind of a good structure in the beginning so you can actually make some good decisions based on data. If everyone is just doing their own thing and using their own tools, like you're not going to have any reliable data to make decisions on. So I think it's a good thing. And I think that's also why so many tools are trying to be the all-in-one solution, because they don't want to be the tool that get ripped out. Uh, so no, I would very much agree with that trend, and I think it's a good trend. Even though if you're a start, like if you're small, you mentioned you had a spreadsheet. I would argue that having some stuff in a spreadsheet initially and even later, I think that's fine as long as you have as much as possible in your kind of central CRM system, so you actually can make some kind of reliable decisions there.
Yeah, totally agree. I think will be super interesting to watch and monitor how the entire revenue and go-to-market tool landscape will develop over the next couple of months. Because yeah, ultimately there's a lot of stuff happening also with AI tools popping up along the way, right? But also HubSpot, Salesforce, all are adopting AI way more. So will also be super interesting to see how much of the new tools that we see from an AI perspective, how many of them will survive and be a standalone solution versus HubSpot and Salesforce just building these things on top of the existing platform. So that will be quite an interesting and dynamic environment to watch for the next months/years.
Yeah, that's a whole like a different like rabbit hole to go into, but I do believe as well, like kind of a little bit what you mentioned there, that like a lot of this kind of wrapper tools, like I think like the bigger players like HubSpot, like they're just gonna so easily integrate like those kind of things into their own tool with very little extra effort. So I think some of those smaller AI players will have a tough time, and it's going to be more the bigger tools who really get the biggest benefit from AI. Side note there, like what? Because I see like there's so many of those AI things coming out. Also in tools like HubSpot, where you like I think there's a new beta now for creating workflows through AI. And to me, that's a little bit dangerous, because I feel like if you don't know what you're doing and you have this tool and you can just spit out reports and workflows, you will create one big mess. But for someone who is already experienced and know the foundation, know how things work and know what they're after, I think it could be kind of an amazing kind of productivity add. But I think it's mainly going to benefit the people who are already experienced more than the unexperienced people, at least looking at the next 6 to 12 months. And this thought haven't matured a lot. Just thought about it yesterday. Do you agree with that or do you disagree? I'm just very curious about your opinion there.
Um, yeah, funnily enough, I saw the same LinkedIn post most likely yesterday. So same LinkedIn bubble. I'd agree with that. I think also speaking about we're talking about having working students, right, who have probably never worked with a CRM before. And what happened quite naturally is they, even with me overseeing them, right, they sometimes think like, yeah, I can build this workflow rather quickly. And all of a sudden they turn it on and 20 minutes later you have an entire mess in your CRM. And then it's about cleaning that up, right? So I think no matter if you're unexperienced and not using AI, or if you're using AI to build workflows, like if you these workflows are so powerful that you can create a lot of value with them and take a lot of burden off the shoulders of individual contributors. But at the same time, you can create a lot of data mass inside of your system. And if you don't have a good understanding of how things are influencing one another, I think um, rather sooner than later you will create that mess in your CRM, and it will be either you cleaning that up, and that most often happens manually. Let's face it. So I think ultimately I'd agree with that statement. I think AI to support building workflows is rather a productivity tool for more experienced folks. I think it can be super, super helpful to build things at scale and to be way quicker. But yeah, you need to be super, super careful about not creating a mess. And I think that happens way easier if you're just unexperienced or you don't really understand yet how a CRM works. And I think until you went through that data mess once, you probably also need that in order to fully understand the consequences of working with strong automations and workflows in the back end.
Yeah. No, what you said there with it's usually manual. So I think everyone, if you work long enough with workflows, like my thing was luckily our own portal a couple of years ago, where I accidentally changed first name to email on every single contact record in our portal, and it took me 4 hours to clean it up or something like that. Um, so it will happen eventually, but yeah, if you get all that power very easy accessible and you don't really understand the overall implications yet, like I think yeah, it's really cool, and I'm definitely looking forward to trying it out. But there's definitely some risks that people should be aware of before, because again, less but better is usually the thing here as well. Like creating a F ton of workflows and reports that is doing random things, like it's going to be very hard to clean that up. It's like repairing an airplane in the air, more difficult than, of course, not spending forever on building up the perfect thing from the beginning because you don't have time to do that, but trying to keep it clean, as clean as possible. I do believe that that's can be quite beneficial as well. But maybe we should, Stefan, unless like, do you have anything else to add on this topic before we kind of transition a bit to the more philosophical things?
Maybe one
Yeah.
last comment to the topic. I think one of the things that I did initially at Sastrify as well, and I'm a firm believer of, is that it's better to limit the number of super admins or people who have editing rights for workflows and whatnot in your CRM, instead of spreading those out and giving everyone who joins super admin access, who can do whatever they want in a CRM. That definitely prevents also from people creating quite a lot of mess inside of a CRM. I'm not saying that throughout the scale of Sastrify. Like yesterday, I spent quite some time with my RevOps team member on reviewing reports and dashboards, because also that's something that where we have no restrictions on, for example. So we started to consolidate again, like, okay, what dashboards are we actually still using? And what are the reports that I actually looked at versus those that can just be deleted. So that also happens if you don't put any restrictions in. But I think especially with workflows where you just have such a powerful engine running in the background, I would rather restrict that and not roll it out to everyone in your go-to-market motion. I think that's one mistake that you can easily prevent, and just restrict it to that one person or two people who are in charge of really working with the CRM, and the rest just gets normal access but no access to workflows. And same thing for properties and whatnot.
Yeah. I'm gradually moving because I was very much, like different thing, but like, drag and drop web editors and super customizable tools where everyone can build their own thing. Like, I feel like the more I'm working with different customers, the more I get into the let's keep it pretty locked, and not leave too many things too open because the risk of creating a mess just increases. So I'm not saying no one should be able to customize anything, but I am definitely moving towards the more locked and more restrictions and just making sure that the system is built out in a good way. But yeah, a little bit less wiggle room for more people. Um, and I was definitely not like that a couple of years ago. So maybe we should, yeah, do a little bit more the philosophical question here in the end.
Yeah.
So looking at, the kind of the journey that you've made, like both on a kind of a professional and personal level, like what would you say is something that's really had a big impact on you in general? Some learning, insight, event, like whatever it might be that you would be willing to share, and why that was such an important thing.
I think looking back, I think I had maybe three different things that really helped me along the way. I think one is that I made that step of moving from a more established organization like Apinio, where we had two RevOps folks. Back then we were around 150 people at a point, where a lot of things were already in place, to shift to Sastrify, where I was then tasked with building everything from scratch. That really helped me to get a deeper understanding of how tools play together, how I think personally about revenue operations, but also tool architecture and processes. And as a consequence, I think for me that was super, super helpful in my personal development and career growth. Because I ultimately at Apinio, for example, I was mainly in charge of reporting, a little bit of customer success operations work, and I think I lacked a lot of the really good technical understanding about processes in our CRM back then. And now at Sastrify, I of course know everything from the bottom of my heart because, yeah, I built everything. So that really helped me within my career. And if I move to another organization, I think it will by nature just help me in whatever position I join that organization. That's one. I think the other thing that I can recommend to people out there who are either in their first revenue operations role, but also people who are potential RevOps leaders, is if you don't have a mentor or some sort of coach who has done what you are currently doing in a different organization. I think that's something that to me proved to be super, super helpful. I'm working with someone now, I think this year for 2 years straight. And with him, I can just discuss and reflect on certain things. And the beauty is that he doesn't have anything to do with Sastrify, and as a consequence, he just helps me to reflect on certain things and helps me reflect on certain decisions, and that really helps me. And connected to that, I think the third piece was starting to talk to more RevOps folks that are out there. I think especially in Europe, the entire field is still rather new. So there are not a lot of people that have necessarily scaled a RevOps function from Series A to post IPO. I think there are not a lot of folks in Europe. You would probably rather have to tap into the US, but there are a lot of RevOps folks out there that have now been working for the past 2 to 3 years in this field and who are very eager to exchange knowledge. So I have a couple of people that I talk to regularly from startups that are slightly bigger than us, that are slightly smaller than us, and all of that. I think also very much helps you to get different perspectives, understand how other organizations are solving things, and by nature that always was a really good resource to tap into. In particular, also when you're talking about which tools to select, right? You can also ask like, hey, back then you were standing somewhere between Salesloft and Outreach. Which one did you pick? And they can tell you, I picked A over B, and I think that by nature can really help you to get a better understanding, especially if you're early in your RevOps career, reaching out to different folks who've been working in the space or are keen to share knowledge. I think that definitely helps as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you picked those three, because I would also say like this. I was reflecting a little bit over kind of when you were talking about it, and like first of all, the first one, like having been part of both the small journey, like small company, and from a big company, and having that kind of combination, I think that trying to get that kind of knowledge because you see so many different things and the challenges are so different, but I think like it's super helpful to actually have seen both. And if you're unable to do that, the second one, like finding someone, I'm still surprised like how many people just try to figure things out on their own all the time. And I think you're wasting so much time, and like you don't have to make every single mistake. If someone made the mistake before and you can actually discuss it with them, understand what they're doing, and that goes for 2 and 3 there, like I think you can get so much more done, and you can learn so much more and get so many different perspectives. So I think like the kind of the mentor piece and there and the community as well, like talking to other people. I've definitely been bad at that one, but I find like just being more active on LinkedIn and engaging with more people in the community there, like you're learning so much and getting so many new perspectives in terms of like what is possible. Because if you don't know what you can actually do, it's kind of hard to make up a strategy if you're not even aware that that option exists. But if you are engaging with the community, you are engaging with mentors and things like that, it also just brings that awareness for where to look. That I think is super important.
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome, Stefan. Let's round up there. So final question for me, like where can people go if they want to, learn a little bit more about you? I know you mentioned as well that you do a little bit of consulting on the side for smaller companies. So if people want to reach out to you, where should they go?
You can just message me on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
I'm always open for chats. I'm happy to share my knowledge. Um, I'm also happy to get inspired by people who are just getting started in revenue operations. I think by nature it's a space that for sure nobody has really figured out yet. So I'm also still learning, and I think if you're keen to chat, just message me on LinkedIn. More than happy to have a coffee chat and then see where that leads to.
awesome. Yeah, we'll be adding some links as well. So under the YouTube and the podcast and also in the LinkedIn post, like we will be adding a link to your profile so people can find you and connect if they want to geek down a bit more into revenue operations.
Sounds good.
But awesome, Stefan. So been an absolute pleasure having you on today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank
And
you.
till the next one.